Welcome to Faith and Sustainability, a podcast where we look deeper into how our faith traditions inspire us to care for our common home. I'm your host, Leonard Robinson.
And I'm Kat Doyle, your co-host. Want to remind everybody that our podcast is made possible from the generous support of Jamie Lanier, the Varlamov Family Foundation, Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, St. Francis Services, and Semco Atlanta. Okay, Leonard, who's our guest?
Today, we have Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley, a distinguished civil rights activist, pastor, and author. He has a rich history in the civil rights movement and a deep commitment to environmental justice.
And he has been with us here in this journey of Laudato Si for the Archdiocese of Atlanta from day one.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and sustainability.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be with you and Kat today.
Very good to have you. Tell us about your journey from the civil rights movement to environmental justice.
Well, I started in the civil rights movement in 1960 with Dr. King. A good friend of mine, I was 18 years old. He was 20 years old, named John Lewis. Another guy was 28 years old, was Andy Young. And we were all there in Nashville at that time. And so all of the ins and the outs, I was over all of the students in Nashville at Tennessee State in 1960 when we led them to the March on Washington. But right after that, Kennedy was killed, and I left America and moved to Africa, stayed there for 2 years. I was in the first Peace Corps group to go there. Again, I share all this background because you never know when things happen and change in your life. I had no idea about going to Africa, but I went on to Africa, and then I couldn't come back to America, so I had to live in Switzerland for a year and a half because they did not allow what they call militants to come back. I came back to America and joined the Panther Party in 1968 in Chicago. And while I was in the Panther Party, I finished a master's degree in psychology at Illinois, and then went on to finish a doctorate from the University of Massachusetts in psychology and another master's in divinity. Now, all of those things, so I came to Atlanta to become the dean at Clark Atlanta University for 4 years, and then the dean at the Morehouse School of Medicine. Now, I say all of that because my whole life was around civil rights and trying to get justice rights. I thought that constitutional rights was so important for all of us. And so one day, a lady came to town, to Atlanta, a white lady, and she wanted to do something with teenage pregnancy. So they said for me to meet her at the airport because she was meeting with a lot of white evangelical ministers from all over the country. And she wanted to talk to them about getting involved with young black girls, she wanted teenage pregnancy. So I met her, and when I got out there with them, it was kind of a tough go because they were giving her quite a bit of grief. And I stepped up and spoke for her. She said, "Thank you." I didn't know the lady, but when I was getting ready to leave, she said, "I want to introduce you to my husband." And I said, "Okay." Her name was Jane Fonda. His name was Ted Turner. And so I met Ted and Jane, and we started going. They started talking about the climate and this, and they introduced me to a lady named Sally Bingham.
Okay.
And Sally Bingham. So
Sally
and I got into it. In fact, I was so uninitiated, I was talking about carbon monoxide in the air rather than carbon dioxide in the air. And then, of course, with Cali, it led one thing. I got deeply involved with the climate change for the last 15 years. And my close friends, of course, Rutherford and Laura Seidel, I just married their son a couple of years ago and getting ready to baptize little Nora, Ted's great-granddaughter now. So all of those are the kinds of things. But more importantly, I became chair of the board of IPL for 7 years and then helped to found Eco America with Bob Perkowitz and Lisa Rinstrom with Eco America out of in Washington. And so my whole contention was that everybody has a constitutional right to clean energy, clean air, clean water. But that was no difference than we had a constitutional right for voting, for justice in terms of the justice system. So it's all about equality. And since the people from the lower income areas suffer the most from climate change, and pollute the least, that was a natural cause for me. So for about 14 to 15 years, really got involved with that. And then the role that we took when we founded Green the Church out of California, getting churches involved since I was pastoring and then a dean at a college, we said, how do we get involved? So that was my quick story of my journey to get to this point. And now it's more important than ever before as we look at alternative energies in terms of solar, and it becomes very paramount when you see the burning fires there in California, when you look at the floods, when you look at the hurricanes. These are people who are losing their rights. And now, as we go into this next 4 years, we've got to look at that very carefully to avoid the fracking, to avoid I think one of the biggest things we got to avoid this time around the climate area is misinformation to the people. Because I just believe that when the people become much more advocacy oriented, I think we could begin to get right back on track and to not be shaken up at this period now.
Oh my gosh, there are so many places we could go with everything we just heard. But one of the really interesting things that came up that I heard as you were talking about is your journey and combining and stair-stepping up. So you had your faith, you learned a little bit about civil rights, you learned a little bit about environmental rights, you learned a little bit about all of these different things. For all the people out there, maybe help us to understand what brought it all together. Where was that coalescence? When did you really see the coming together of faith and sustainability?
I don't think you ever really see anything coming together. I think you're on a journey, and it's an accidental. It wasn't a planned course of action in my life. It's something that happens. I'd never thought that I'd be living in Africa at 22, in Switzerland at 24, in the Panther Party in 68. These were things that just happened. But I think if you have a certain kind of propensity to try to fight for justice, then the different winds will carry you in different directions. Had I not gone out there with that lady at the airport, I never would have been in the climate change era. And then I just began to make the connection between so many of the things that I was seeing, that people were being disenfranchised, and it was a natural connection that we had been disenfranchised as African Americans, the last hired, first fired, and all those things. So it was a natural connection. So I just began to speak out. So I don't think that there's any one specific point that I could point to that would change. I think it's a continuous evolving of who you are and what you stand for. And if you stand for kind of, I think, some ethical, moral kinds of conditioning, it continues to guide you.
I think that's what really where I was seeing you going was it was that moral compass.
Yeah.
It was that faith tradition that was so deeply ingrained that helped you to keep an open mind and to consider other things. Is that how you would?
Well, initially when I got into it, you've got to understand one thing. I was coming from fighting large white institutions. And as far as I was concerned, I could have cared less whether a polar bear could have gotten to the next glacier. I could have cared less whether a tree was cut down in deforestation, not when you're living in the heart of D.C. or Chicago or L.A. What did that mean to me? It meant literally or nothing. But then I began to connect what was actually going on in terms of what was going on in the atmosphere and how it negatively, disproportionately impacted us. Then I began to understand in Genesis it said God gave us this planet. He gave it to take care, to be good stewards of that planet. And we were not being good stewards. And therefore, that I began to shift a little bit to understand. Then I began to take what I was learning in the scriptures, and I began to make the parallelism of how we just tend to destroy what God has put together. And even now, I came up, I don't know how to say it now, but I'm looking at the California burning, and they're saying, and I'm saying, look what they're doing to Mother Nature, and Mother Nature is not really happy. But then I started thinking, Mother Nature's been around a long time. I believe Father Nature is not happy right now. And Father Nature has joined in with Mother Nature. When you get the parents together, we've got to straighten up because we are creating this and we're denying it.
Yes.
And you cannot deny what's going on now when you look at the floods, when you look at the hurricanes and all of this. So now we've got to understand to whom much is given, much is required. Therefore, we have a moral, ethical obligation. We're on a moral, ethical war around the climate. That's the only thing I think can fight the political and the economic issues. When we look up, we've been pulled out of the Paris Treaty just a few years ago. We were going over fighting for those things. But I've often said if everything is coming your way, you're in the wrong lane.
Well, I have a question. It's a combination question and a combination call to action. Let's take a bigger picture. What's the role of faith-based organizations and the faith movement in sustainability, climate change, and circularity,
Well,
in the
I
movement?
think like in anything else, people perish because lack of knowledge. So one of the key roles that those in the faith community that we've got to do, because we've got to educate our people and enlighten our people. And in order to do that, whenever you're giving a speech or a sermon or an exhortation, you try to draw on what people know. So we're taking the scriptures and showing that we are destroying. If we're destroying the earth, then we're destroying our lives. And people only begin to change, even in, I'm talking about in the spiritual world. Now, in the economic business world, it's profit over people. They're going to keep on fracking. They're going to keep on digging until we can begin to enlighten them, enough people so that we can begin to change the voting patterns. And when we run against voting patterns and economic stability, that's a real challenge. I think one of the major roles that the faith community can do is not give up hope. Because once you get a hopeless people, then they're just they sit back. So I always say, be ye not weary in well-doing, for you'll reap in due season if you faint not. We're in due season now. Okay. D-U-E season and D-O season. We've got to do something during this due season. But those are the kinds of words that we use to exhort people. And then once they know, because people are, I've lived long enough to know that people are basically good and they want to do right. They want to try to do right. But there are certain oligarchs that are going in another direction. So the faith community and the science community must come together. They're not incongruent. They work together, and we've always worked together. So, and the two things that I think that keep me going at this stage in my life, what kept me going into the civil rights movement were two words. And I always ask people, are you ready to face these two words? What are you willing to sacrifice and what are you willing to risk? Mm-hmm. If you're not willing to sacrifice anything to risk, go on to a sorority meeting or fraternity meeting. But if you're really to get out here and go back into the fight, that's what we've got to do. So the church, the faith community can not only combine it with all of the great faiths of the world, whether it's Buddhism, Shintoism, Taoism, Judaism, Muslim, Islam, they're all saying the same thing, that there's a higher deity that created it all for us to live. So now we've got to go back to that and begin to do it. And I don't believe God will be mocked. I believe that if we stay in there, he said, if you call on my name, then I will hear. If my people who are called by my name will just humble themselves, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and do what? Heal their land. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 2 Chronicles 7:14.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna step back here and say, you started a lot of this work that you were doing at a very young age. What's your message to our youth?
That everything does not occur with older people. That everything that's really occurred, whether it was in China at the wall, whether it was, I was 18 then. I'm 83 years old now. And so I got in the movement 65 years ago, and I don't feel no way tired. And the deeper you get into the movement, the more people that you meet to encourage you. It's so easy to give up. And I think and so it's a two-way street. Those of us who have reached a certain age, we've got to learn from the younger people and taking their energy. And what I like to say is energy. What is energy? It's like water. Water is H2O. And water that comes into a village at an alarming rate, we call it a flood. But keep that energy there and put some parameters around it, and it's called irrigation. Take the same energy and let that energy, so take the energy of the youth and let it flow on the issues that we're talking about, then we see growth.
In the faith-based world, we're worshipers, but we're also consumers and voters. How do we use that power to do the greater good?
Well, I think, and two of the things when you're in seminary and all, and you've been in, we use certain words, 3 words: homiletics, exegesis, and hermeneutics. Exegesis is when you get the research and get all the information. Homiletics is how you speak, like Martin Luther King was a homiletician. But hermeneutics is the key word. Hermeneutics, when you take a scripture, or when you take any kind of, and make it live in that person's life. So when you're singing, like, for example, in the Baptist church, we got a song called I'm on the Battlefield. Mm-hmm. And everybody sings I'm on the battlefield. And I told people, don't sing that song around me anymore. I don't need anybody else to say they're on the battlefield. I need some people who are in the battle. There's a difference between being on the battlefield and in the battle. Mm-hmm. So I'm taking so when the hymns come up, I say, I am in the battle for this effort, not on the battlefield. I know a lot of people have been on the battlefield, never got a scratch. They never been in debt, never faced any kind of divorce. So it's taking it into hermeneutics. Hermeneutics simply means making what you say live in their life. Mm-hmm. Make it real in their life. Don't just make it live from you. Or don't just give the scripture and all. How does that translate into and really you're appealing to, how does that translate? You're appealing to the godness in somebody, and because I believe intrinsically everybody wants to do well, everybody wants to be loved, everybody wants to love. Mm-hmm. So you appeal that, but you just take what your message is and come in. How can, for example, if it's climate change, you've got a beautiful baby here, and this baby's not breathing well, or the air condition, you've got to protect your baby.
Right.
You've got to protect it. So then you tie that. That's the hermeneutics in the church.
So meeting people where they are.
Where they are.
And getting that message to mean something to them where they are.
When I spoke at the Church of the Latter-day Saints, I used one set of examples. When I go to First Baptist Church with Dwight Ant, I use a completely different set, because these people wouldn't understand what I would be saying. And these people, and it's a different thing of who is interpreting and where are they and what are the kinds of issues that they go through. When you come through, we always say everybody bleeds the same, and it comes out red, but different people in different places in life. And so in order to be effective, you've got to know, at least take the time to find out where they are.
So the message is pretty much the same for all of us. How are we going to take care of this world?
That's it.
But the words we use and what we talk about and examples are what we need to make sure the people we're talking to are getting the message.
Right. For me to talk about planets and talk about trees and talk about polar bears to the next thing and all that, it doesn't register. But it can register when you talk about this is a heat wave and you don't have an air conditioner. You're living on the 19th floor of an apartment in Chicago, and it's created by what we're doing. And I don't need to get into the greenhouse gases in terms of carbon dioxide and getting into 1.5 Celsius and all of that. 1.5 Celsius, this is a math class? No. This is so it's a matter of keeping it basic.
Can you tell us something that would surprise us, our listeners, about how you live a sustainable life? What's something you do that would surprise us? Like, I might recycle, or you might choose not to use styrofoam. Is there any interesting little way that you live this life that might surprise us?
I think it would surprise, and I guess it's the most realistic thing I do now. Before they were laughing at me 10 years ago when I started changing light bulbs. I changed them in my home and went to fluorescent bulbs and all that. Then at the church, everything is going to be fluorescent. Well, darn, these things cost way more in the budget. But the longevity. So now in my own home, I've got, wherever it is, I got switches that turn them off and turn them on at a certain time. So so the lighting in my home, it's not, whether it comes on here, it comes on then. I got them shifted at different times. So if I'm not there, it will click off if I leave. So that's the thing. That was never in my mind before, but lighting in the home, so it helps on the budget, and also it helps to protect on the outside. But it's something that now I got 3 different timers in 3 different parts in the room. So that's something that, nobody would really know.
Yes.
I love it.
Well, Reverend Dr. Durley, activist, advocate, pastor, author, thank you so much for coming on the show.
In that book, I am amazed. At the end of the chapter, I said, where I'm going in this, I use the term, an acronym. They said, what are you going to do with the rest of the life? I said, it's going to be around alive, ALIVE, alive. And that means a life is valuable every day. Yep. So, and it ties right into the justice system. It ties into the environment. We have a moral, ethical obligation to realize that everyone around this table, your life is valuable.
Words of wisdom. All right. Well, stay connected with us on social media. Share your journey with the hashtag Faith and Sustainability.
And don't forget to like us and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you'll know when new episodes are available, and you'll be aware of all of the ways that we're trying to meet people where they are. So until next time, Leonard, we'll look forward to meeting you
at the intersection of faith and sustainability.
The preceding podcast is a production of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Atlanta. Copyright 2025.